Thank you so much. I'm going to share on part two of something that I shared on a number of weeks ago. And for anybody who wasn't here, I'm going to do a quick recap to kind of bring everybody up to speed before we kind of launch into this second part. I share my screen here. And we're going to begin in the book of Ezra. Last time we talked about the history of Israel toward the end of the monarchy and the divided kingdom, and the captivity of getting conquered, the northern kingdom first by Assyria in 722, and then Assyria getting conquered by Babylon, and then Babylon conquering Judah and eventually taking away the Israelites into exile, into the land of Babylon, and ultimately destroying the temple. So in Ezra chapter 1, Ezra is the beginning of the post-exilic narrative of the story of Israel. It says in verse 1, "Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of Yahweh by the mouth of Jeremiah, Yahweh stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and also put it in writing, saying, 'This is what Cyrus, king of Persia says. Yahweh, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has commanded me to build him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever is among you of all his people, may his God be with him. Let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and build the house of Yahweh, the God of Israel. He is the God who is in Jerusalem. And let each one who has survived in whatever place he may live be assisted by the men of his place with silver and with gold and with goods and with animals, besides the freewill offering for the house of God that is in Jerusalem.'" Okay, so we come to the point here with Cyrus, king of Persia. He's a really important ruler, but we're going to step back for 1 second to the previous powerhouse in the ancient world, King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. King Nebuchadnezzar was the one who laid siege to Jerusalem and Judah and took the captives away. Now, at the end of the nation of Israel and the monarchy, Babylon, this is the Babylon here, it basically owned the entire Fertile Crescent. This is the Fertile Crescent right here. This was the land that Babylon took over from Assyria previously, and conquering finally Jerusalem, and then leading captives away all the way over into Babylon. Now, there were three different waves that happened. The first one beginning in 605 BC. And this was when people like the prophet Daniel and his friends, who were of the aristocracy kind of class, they got deported to Babylon. And then 597. Babylon came back. There was a little skirmish that happened with an attempt to try to for Israel to try to shake the reins of Babylon and not be a vassal kingdom to them. And then finally, after trying to align themselves with Egypt in a failed kind of a coup, Nebuchadnezzar sent in the army and took over and laid siege to Jerusalem and conquered it and demolished the city, destroyed the temple, and took away a vast majority of all the citizens to Babylon. And that was in the infamous 586 BC. So these are the three different deportations into captivity for Babylon. Now, we just read about Cyrus the Great. Cyrus the Great, Nebuchadnezzar was like he was the big kid on the block for a while, until the kingdom of Persia rose to power, conquering the kingdom of the Medes, of Media, and then growing over eastward and then on into Babylon. So here's the rise of Persia. This is in the late 7th century, 7th century into the 6th century. So we have really the rise happens in the mid 6th century, as you see down here. This is really when Persia comes up, takes over Media, and then comes and conquers Babylon, takes over and becomes the new world superpower. Now, when this happens, that's when what we read about in Ezra chapter 1, Cyrus the Great, king of Persia, he has defeated Babylon, which happened in 609. 609 BC, Cyrus conquers the kingdom's capital of Nineveh, if I can spell it right. Nineveh. And the kingdom of Babylon crumbles, and Persia becomes the new dominant superpower in the world. We actually know a lot about Cyrus the Great. And I want to go into just a couple details here before returning back to the narrative in Ezra. But this is actually Cyrus's tomb that they discovered in the late 19th century in Iran. And so, you know, Cyrus the Great, there are records about him in history. He's a historical figure. You know, I think sometimes we read all these names in the Bible and we may not understand that there's actually strong connections historically, archaeologically, epigraphically to a lot of the people in the Bible. I think, if I remember, a Biblical Archaeological Review, which my colleague John Schoenheit has a subscription to, they came out with an article a couple years ago, I think, that they have 52 confirmed names proven through historical data. I don't know of any other religious book that has such a strong historical connection as the Bible does. And not only just his tomb, I was able to go to the British Museum a number of years ago when I was backpacking around Europe. And they have discovered this cylinder, which is a clay cylinder written in ancient Akkadian language. It's called the Cyrus cylinder because it's actually, it was commissioned by King Cyrus, and it was commissioned after he conquered Nineveh and destroyed the Babylonian Empire. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing. This is just a little summation of what it contains, but it kind of talks about his Cyrus and his conquering of Babylon. He kind of like puts down the former king of Babylon, Nabonidus, and he talks about his reign, and he brings peace. And he believes that the god Marduk, which is a Babylonian god, has looked favorably upon him rather than Nabonidus. And so now he's been brought in to bring peace and prosperity to the land, and that he has these grand plans for what he's going to do with the kingdom. And so once King Cyrus's influence has kind of permeated the whole realm, you could say, where he has conquered the kingdom of the Medes, the kingdom of the Babylonians, even down here, the kingdom of Egypt. He owns essentially the whole known world, pretty much. It's the greatest kingdom that has ever existed. Up to that time, I should say. Once Alexander the Great comes on the scene, he actually has a larger kingdom than this with the Roman Empire and the Greeks. But at this time, this is the biggest empire there is. So when Cyrus comes in, takes over, he now has these Jewish people, the Israelites, living among them. And he says here that the Spirit was stirred up by Yahweh in him to make a proclamation to let the Israelites return to Jerusalem, and not just return empty-handed, but return with supplies in order to rebuild the house of Yahweh. And it's interesting that he mentions this was spoken by the prophet Jeremiah. One of the great things about the Bible is that there are a number of prophecies that are given and fulfilled that can be historically verifiable. And this dates back to when Jeremiah, and even at the end of Chronicles, the writer of Chronicles, whether or not it's pre or post-exilic, he mentions the Cyrus, the king of Persia, that he fulfilled the word spoken by Jeremiah as well. But in Jeremiah, let's just go look at it here. Jeremiah 25, I believe. Jeremiah 25. No, it's 25:9, I think. Here we are. All right, so verse 10. Well, we can say, let's just take verse 9. Behold, I will send and take all the families of the north, says Yahweh. I will send to Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, my servant, which he's referring to Cyrus, and will bring against them this land and against its inhabitants and against all these nations around. And I will devote them to destruction and make them a horror and a hissing and an everlasting desolations. Moreover, I will take from them the sound of joy and the sound of gladness, the voice of the groom and the voice of the bride, and the sound of the millstones and the light of the lamp. This whole land will be a desolation and an astonishment, and these nations will serve the king of Babylon for 70 years. When 70 years are accomplished, I will punish the king of Babylon and that nation, referring to Babylonia, says Yahweh, for their iniquity, meaning for their sinfulness, for their wickedness, and the land of the Chaldeans, and I will make it desolate forever. So this is the prophecy that is being referred to both in 2 Chronicles 36 and also in Ezra chapter 1, that there's going to be 70 years of punishment by the Babylonians, and then God will punish the Babylonians. So God uses the pagan nation of Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar to execute his judgment and wrath upon Israel for their rebelliousness and for their wickedness. And then he uses the pagan nation of Persia to then punish the sinfulness and wickedness of Babylon. These are just tools that God uses to accomplish his plans and purposes. Now, the prophecy of Cyrus actually was his name itself. The coming of Cyrus as the king of Persia was spoken by the prophet Isaiah 150 years before Cyrus even became the king. And this is in Isaiah 45. So Isaiah prophesying 150 years before Cyrus is born and becomes king. Isaiah says, this is what Yahweh says to his anointed. Essentially, this is the word Messiah, his Mashiach. This is Yahweh's Messiah is Cyrus, to whose right hand I have held, to subdue nations before him, to strip kings of their armor, to open the doors before him, and the gates will not be shut. Now he says, I will go before you and make the rough places smooth. I will break the doors of bronze in pieces and cut apart the bars of iron. I will give you the treasures of darkness and hidden riches of secret places, so that you may know that it is I, Yahweh, even the God of Israel, who calls you by your name. If you remember back in Ezra, King Cyrus talks about Yahweh, the God of heaven. So he has come to know Yahweh in some way. Maybe it's from the Israelites, or maybe this was direct revelation given to him. But he is the chosen one that God is using to carry out his plan and to fulfill the prophecy concerning the 70 years under the regime of Babylon. So let's continue reading here, and this will now get us into how the Israelites, under the kingdom of Persia with Cyrus the Great, get freed from their captivity to return back to the land, to the promised land of Canaan. So, verse 5, when the heads of the fathers' houses of Judah and Benjamin, and the priests and the Levites, even all whose spirit God had stirred to go up, they rose up to build the house of Yahweh that is in Jerusalem. All those who were around them strengthened their hands with articles of silver, with gold, with goods, with animals, and with valuable things, besides everything that was willingly offered. Also, Cyrus the king brought out the articles of the house of Yahweh that Nebuchadnezzar had carried away from Jerusalem and had put in the house of his gods, particularly Marduk. If you remember from last time, when Nebuchadnezzar razed Jerusalem, he looted the temple and the treasury, and he took away all the implements and the ark and the sea and all the menorah and the lampstands and everything. He took it all away to Babylon. Well, now Cyrus is giving it all back. He's now letting the Israelites take the temple items with them when they go back to rebuild the temple. This is an incredible show of grace to the Israelites, and to see how God is working through Cyrus to fulfill his word through the prophet Jeremiah. So Cyrus, king of Persia, brought those out by the hand of Midratheth, the treasurer, and counted them out to Sheshbazzar, the governor of Judah. This is the number of them. So you have a bunch of gold, a bunch of silver, a bunch of knives, a bunch of gold bowls, a bunch of silver bowls of a different kind, and a bunch of other things. All the articles of gold and silver were 5,400. Sheshbazzar brought all these up when those who had been in exile were brought up from Babylon to Jerusalem. Now, there are going to be multiple returns to Babylon, and this is the first one. And this first one here is happened in somewhere around the year, I don't know, 537, maybe 536. But King Cyrus defeated the Babylonian Empire in 539 and began his reign in 538, because as we get closer, we count down in BC time. And so after this, we have this decree, and then there's some preparation. And if you guys saw the journey, so if they're over here in Babylon, they're going to have to, they can't just go straight across because of all the desert. So they're going to have to go up, and then they're going to have to come down to Jerusalem right here. And this is a multi-month, like we're talking like 4 to 7 month trip, depending upon how they traveled and the amount of distance they covered. So by the time King Cyrus takes the throne over the kingdom of Babylon and issues this decree, it could very well be late 537, in the middle of 536, sometime around there, by the time they get into actually being back in the land of Israel, in Judah. Well, let's continue on in chapter 2 of Ezra. Okay, so the exiles who leave Babylon. Now these are the people of the province who came up out of the captivity of those who had been in exile, whom Nebuchadnezzar the king of Babylon had carried away to Babylon, and who returned to Jerusalem and Judah, everyone to his city, who came with Zerubbabel, Jeshua, Nehemiah, Sariah, Relaliah, Mordecai, Bishan, Mispar, Bigvai, Nahum, and Baanah. All of these people who came with them, there's a massive list. I'm not going to go through and read all these sometimes tricky Hebrew names, But you can read the whole list. But what I want to go to is I want to go to the summation here in verse 64. The whole assembly together, everybody who was part of this exile, who was part of the exile returning to Judah, and some scholars think that perhaps this is a different exile, or sorry, a different return from exile than the one mentioned at the end of chapter 1, where Sheshbazzar is the governor of Judah and is said to bring people back. And now here there's another list of people under the leadership of this number of people, including Jeshua, Zerubbabel, Nehemiah, Sariah, Realiah, Mordecai, Bishan, Mispar, Bigvai, Rehum, and Baanah. This group of people are said to lead these leaders are said to lead another group of people back. So it could be the same group, and Sheshbazzar is just part of this group as well. This could be a separate return from Babylon to Jerusalem as well. So we have 43,360 people leaving Babylon, returning to the land of Judah to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. And besides them, they have servants, male slaves, female slaves, 7,337 of them. They had a bunch of singing men and women. They had tons of horses, mules, camels, and donkeys. So they are well stocked. Remember, when Cyrus told the Israelites they could return, they were going to be given supplies. And this is part of those supplies that they were able to receive and then take back to Judah. Some of the heads of fathers' households, verse 68, when they came to the house of Yahweh that is in Jerusalem. So now we've transported from Babylon. We're now in Judah and we're in Jerusalem. When the heads of the fathers' households, you could say these are the patriarchs of the families, when they came to the house of Yahweh that's in Jerusalem, they offered willingly for God's house to set it up on its site. So they were like, let's rebuild it right here. According to their ability, they gave into the treasury for the work. They were moved to have this work done, and they gave of the resources that they had brought with them. They have 61,000 derricks of gold and 5,000 minas of silver, 100 priests' garments. Now the priests and the Levites and some of the people and the singers and the gatekeepers and the temple servants, they lived in their cities, and all Israel in their cities. So they've returned now, this large group. We have Sheshbazzar and then that little team of leaders, including Zerubbabel, which we're going to get to. The point of this teaching is to talk about this guy right here. This one of the leaders whose name is Zerubbabel. And if you've never heard this guy's name before, it could sound kind of funny, but he's actually a key player in this whole narrative of the rebuilding of the temple after the return from exile. So let's go back and let's move on to Ezra chapter 3 when we start to get into the action of the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem. When the 7th month had come and the children of Israel were in the cities, the people gathered themselves together as one man. They came together as one body here of people to Jerusalem. Then Jeshua, the son of Jozadak, stood up with his brothers, the priests, and Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and his brothers, and built the altar of the God of Israel. These two men, Jeshua and Zerubbabel, they rebuilt the altar of God so that they can offer sacrifices. And they offered burnt offerings on it, as is written in the law of Moses, the man of God. In spite of their fear, because of the people of the surrounding lands, they set the altar on its base and offered burnt offerings on it to Yahweh, even burnt offerings morning and evening. It says that they had fear. I don't know if I'd say that they were actually afraid, but I think that they were aware that people in that area, people in the region around Jerusalem, around Judah, that they were not taking kindly to the activity of these Israelites coming back into the land and setting up this altar to the God Yahweh. But despite that pressure, despite the potential anxiety that they might be experiencing, Jeshua and Zerubbabel led the people to doing what they came back to do, and that is to honor and worship Yahweh and restore his house. Verse 4, they kept the Feast of Booths, so they returned to now observing the festivals, as it is written, meaning as it is written in the law of Moses, and offered the daily burnt offerings by number according to the ordinance that is written in the law of Moses, and as the duty of every day required. And after that, the regular burnt offerings, the offerings at the new moons, and all of the appointed feasts of Yahweh that were holy, and of everyone who freely offered a free will offering to Yahweh. So they rounded up and organized the people to begin observing the different festivals, the different offerings, and all the ordinances that are established in the law of Moses that God wanted his people to follow. From the first day to the 7th month, they began to offer burnt offerings to Yahweh, but the foundation of the temple had not yet been laid. So they set up the altar and they began offering the sacrifices and observing the moons and the festivals, but the temple had not been, the foundation had not yet been laid. So they also gave money to the masons and to the carpenters. They also gave food and drink and oil to the people of Sidon and Tyre to bring cedar trees from Lebanon to the sea to Joppa, according to the grant that they had from King Cyrus, king of Persia. So Cyrus had given them a grant to obtain building materials. And here they've been worshiping Yahweh, but now it's time to start rebuilding the temple and to lay the foundation. So masons and carpenters are now given supplies, given money, and food and drink and everything. And they sent up to Tyre and Sidon. They sent for the Lebanon, the lumber from Lebanon, the cedar trees, which get floated down the coastline to Joppa in Israel. Verse 8, now in the 2nd month of the 2nd year. So up above, verse 6, from the first day of the 7th month, this is after they returned. So they don't even begin building for another year and a half about. So a year and a half later, they now have supplies. So the 2nd month of the 2nd year after coming to the house of God at Jerusalem, Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and Jeshua, the son of Josedek, and the rest of their brothers, the priests and the Levites, and all those who had come out of the captivity to Jerusalem, they began the work and appointed the Levites from 20 years old and upward to have the oversight of the work of the house of Yahweh. Then Jeshua, with his sons and brothers, Kadmiel and his sons, the sons of Judah together, and the sons of Henadad, with their sons and their brothers of the Levites, undertook to have the oversight of the workmen in the house of God. So a group of the Israelites, led by Zerubbabel and Jeshua, to begin this work of rebuilding the temple. When the builders laid the foundation of the temple of Yahweh, they set the priests in their cloaks with trumpets, with the Levites and the sons of Asaph with the cymbals to praise Yahweh with music and with singing, according to the directions of David, king of Israel. This is essentially from the Psalms, not David, king of Israel, was there with them. This is the Psalms, the songs that David had composed. They sang responsively and praising and giving thanks to Yahweh, saying, "For he is good, for his loving kindness endures forever toward Israel." All the people shouted with a great shout when they praised Yahweh, because the foundation of the house of Yahweh had been laid. This was a time of celebration. It had been 70 years. A whole new generation had risen up in Babylon who didn't know the temple. They didn't know the festivals. They weren't offering sacrifices at the temple, and they were allowed to return. And now the temple, the foundation had been built, the altar is set up, and the people are shouting with joy because this is such a glorious day. They've been looking forward to this for so long. Now, the people who had known here in verse 12, but many of the priests and Levites, the heads of fathers' households, these are the old patriarchs, the old men who had seen the first house, meaning the original temple in Jerusalem back before it was destroyed in 586 BC, because now we're down in somewhere around the 530, 520 range. This is when the rebuilding is happening. There are some people who were alive back in 586 to know the original temple. When they see the old men who had seen the first house when the foundation of this house was laid before their eyes, wept with a loud voice. Many also shouted aloud for joy. So there were some who they knew that it didn't compare to the original glory of the Solomonic temple that was destroyed in 586. But there are others who weren't looking for the comparison, but they shouted aloud for joy. And it was so mixed, it says, that the people could not discern the noise of the shouts of joy from the noise of the weeping of the people. For the people shouted with a loud shout, and the noise was heard far away. So there's such a mixed response among the Israelites, some very happy and some very sad. But it was so mixed that people couldn't discern what the noise was. So now the temple foundation is laid. The people are rejoicing and weeping. And here comes the next scene in the story. Verse 1, now when the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin heard that the exiles who had returned were building a temple to Yahweh, the God of Israel, then they drew near to Zerubbabel and to the heads of the fathers' households and said to them, let us build with you, because we seek your God as you do. And we sacrifice to him since the days of Esarhaddon, the king of Syria, who brought us up here. But Zerubbabel and Jeshua and the rest of the heads of the fathers' households of Israel said to them, you have nothing in common with us in building a house to our God, but we ourselves will together build to Yahweh, the God of Israel, as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, has commanded us. Then the people of the land weakened the hands of the people of Judah and made them afraid to build, and hired counselors against them to frustrate their purposes all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, even until the reign of Darius, king of Persia. So the people around Judah who knew what the exiles were doing, they hatched a plan. They're like, why don't we go join them? And implicitly what this means is they're not genuinely coming to help. They're coming to sabotage. They want to sabotage the work so that the temple will not be built. And I think about the way that in our lives we have influences from the world, and we have people who they aren't genuine in the way that they want to help or the way that they want to interact with us. And I think here Zerubbabel and Jeshua, I think they discerned this. They discerned that it's not going to be to their advantage to invite other people in who they do not know and they do not trust in order to protect the work that they are doing. The adversary, it's, in Peter's first letter, chapter 5, verse 7, he walks around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he can devour. And that's what's happening here with these opponents of the land of Judah here. But Zerubbabel and Jeshua, they say, no, we will do it ourselves. We have come here according to the commandment of Cyrus, king of Persia, and we are going to build the house of Yahweh together. But the people hired counselors to frustrate their purposes and made them afraid to build. And so it says that they were afraid until the reign of Darius, king of Persia. This is like 20 years later. So there's been a giant, massive hiccup, you could say, kind of a roadblock. And it's not written here in the text, but there's a large span of time in which no more building carried on. And I actually want to they get a letter together and send it over to Persia, to King Artaxerxes, and they end up getting the work here, verse 24, on the temple. They got it to be ceased. And this was done until the second year of the reign of King Darius of Persia. Now, King Darius of Persia, he began his reign in 521. So this is like 520, 519, that there's no more work being done. And remember, they came in like 536. So between 536 BC and 520, 519 BC, the only thing that was able to be done is the altar rebuilt and the temple foundation laid. Verse 1, chapter 5. So there are the prophets Haggai and Zechariah, the son of Iddo. They prophesied to the Jews who were in Judah and Jerusalem in the name of the God of Israel who was over them. Then, here we go again, Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and Jeshua. These two guys are like a powerhouse duo. The son of Josadak, they rose up and began to build the house of God that is in Jerusalem, and the prophets of God were with them, helping them. Now, I don't know if they were doing it all by themselves, but they were taking the initiative to continue the work for which they had come back to the land of Judah to accomplish, to rebuild the house of Yahweh. At that same time, Tattenai, the governor beyond the river, and Shethar-Bozenai and their companions came to them, and said this to them, "Who gave you a decree to build this house and to finish this structure?" They also asked them, "What are the names of the men who are building this building?" But the eye of their God was on the elders of the Jews, and they did not make them cease until the matter could come to Darius, and then an answer could be returned by letter about it. So they come questioning another leadership of the surrounding nations had risen up. They come and they question what's going on. So they send a letter to Darius, and if you read the rest of chapter 5, this is the letter to Darius, and it actually comes back in favor of allowing the Israelites to continue their work. And Darius, the king of Persia, goes and finds the original decree made by Cyrus the king and sends it back and tells that not only should the Israelites continue building the temple, but they are actually to be provided more supplies and support from the surrounding nations. So Tattenai, who's the governor beyond the river, and Shethar-Bozenai and their companions, because of the decree that had come back from King Darius, they did according to everything that was said, which was to help the Israelites, and they did it with all diligence. The elders of the Jews built and prospered through the prophesying of Haggai the prophet and Zechariah the son of Iddo. They built and finished it. They finished the house of Yahweh, the temple, according to the commandment of the God of Israel, and according to the decree of Cyrus and Darius, even Artaxerxes, king of Persia. This house was finished on the 3rd day of the month of Adar, which was in the 6th year of the reign of Darius the king. There are a couple dates that I think are really interesting. And there's different ways to construct how the 70 years are accomplished. And there are 70 years where Babylon dominated the nations. 609 to 539, when Babylon was taken over by Persia. There's also the Jewish captivity, which officially began in 605 and then ended with the return in 536. And then there's the judgment upon Judah and the destruction of Jerusalem, which happened with the destruction of the temple and then its rebuilding and dedication in 516. So the prophecies about the 70 years pertain to a number of different aspects of God's judgment, but each one of these categories whether it's the Babylonian oppression, whether it's the exile into captivity, or whether it's the destruction and rebuilding of the temple. They're actually all 70-year time frames. So I think it's actually, this is, I think it's a fascinating aspect of God's plan to fulfill prophecy and to restore his people to the land that he gave to their forefathers. And I think that this is a testimony and the way that all of this is working together to show the reliability of the scriptures and the testimony of the Bible and the faithfulness of our God. So this is the return, at least the first part. There's actually 3 parts to the return. Maybe I should do more. But Ezra with Zerubbabel and Jeshua leading the people back with Sheshbazzar. This is the first wave of return of exiles returning to the land of Israel. Their job was to rebuild the temple. Next, about I think 80 years later, Ezra will actually come back himself, and he will teach the people the law of Moses, and he will get the scroll, and they will read it before the people. And then I forget. There's another span of time. Might be another 50 years after that, but Nehemiah returns, and Nehemiah gathers the people, and they rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. And these are all 3 different times that people returning from Babylon are accomplishing aspects of the restoration of the kingdom of Israel in Judah. So, Rob, that's what I had to share today. I hope you guys enjoyed history